At the edge of Lake Starnberg, where the Bavarian forest presses close to the water and the wind moves quietly through tall pines, stands a mansion that rarely appears in travel guides. It is not crowned with fairy tale towers like Neuschwanstein, nor does it dominate postcards of royal Bavaria. Instead, it rests low against the shoreline, partially concealed by trees, as though it prefers memory to attention. This is Berg Palace, once the private refuge of Queen Marie of Prussia, and later the final residence of her son, King Ludwig II. Long before it became associated with royal tragedy, Berg was a retreat built for stillness. Its origins stretch back to the 17th century, when a modest castle stood on this same lakeside ground. By the early 19th century, it had been transformed into a neoclassical palace, facing the open water with restrained elegance rather than theatrical display. Unlike the grand residence in Munich, Berg was never meant to impress foreign dignitaries. It was designed to withdraw from them. In 1842, Princess Marie of Prussia married Crown Prince Maximilian of Bavaria. A Protestant, entering a deeply Catholic kingdom, she found herself in a court bound tightly by ceremony. Munich's royal life was formal and visible. Every movement of a queen was observed. Yet Marie was not content to exist only within gilded halls. She found freedom at Berg. The palace stood beyond the rigid structures of the capital, surrounded by dense woodland and stretching views across Lake Starnberg. Here, Marie could ride horses through forest paths, climb nearby hills, and cultivate a life that felt less restrained. She was known for her athleticism and love of the outdoors, unusual traits for a royal woman of the mid-19th century. Berg allowed her to step beyond expectation. The architecture reflected that quieter purpose. Its facade faced the lake in pale symmetry, but behind it lay gardens and wooded terrain that blurred the boundary between structure and nature. The air was different here, fewer uniforms, fewer formalities. The lake absorbed sound, and the forest softened it. When Maximilian II became king in 1848, Berg continued to function as a summer residence. It was here that their young son, Crown Prince Ludwig, spent formative years. The isolation of the estate shaped him in ways that Munich never could. Removed from constant court ceremony, Ludwig wandered wooded paths and stared across vast water horizons. The quiet left an imprint. He grew up in the shadow of expectations, educated to rule, yet drawn to solitude. At Berg, imagination had room to expand. The interplay of forest, lake, and subdued architecture fostered introspection rather than political engagement. When King Maximilian II died in 1864, Ludwig ascended the throne at just 18. His reign would later be defined by architectural ambition. Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, Herrenchiemsee, palaces of theatrical scale and private vision. But Berg remained different. It was inherited, not invented. It carried memory rather than fantasy. During the early years of his reign, Ludwig returned often to Berg. While Munich demanded administrative focus, the lakeside estate offered retreat. It was familiar ground, tied to his mother's presence and childhood summers. Even as his relationship with ministers grew strained, Berg remained constant. In the 1870s, Ludwig ordered renovations to modernize the palace. Towers were subtly added, interiors updated, and comfort improved. Yet, he did not transform it into spectacle. Berg retained its restrained character. The surrounding forest continued to serve as natural enclosure. But by the 1880s, Bavaria's political climate had shifted. Ludwig's spending on grand projects, though largely financed through personal loans, alarmed government officials. His increasing withdrawal from public affairs deepened concern. Ministers began to question not just his financial decisions, but his mental stability. And once again, Berg's isolation became central. What had once been Queen Marie's refuge and Ludwig's childhood sanctuary would soon become the setting of intervention. In June 1886, after a controversial psychiatric evaluation, conducted without personal examination, Ludwig was declared unfit to rule. The order of deposition was signed. Government envoys first attempted to arrest him at Neuschwanstein, but local loyalty delayed their effort. Days later, they succeeded. Ludwig was transported to Berg Palace under supervision. The forest that once shielded private royal life now concealed political control. Inside the mansion, corridors that had echoed with childhood footsteps fell quiet. Guards monitored movement. Communication was restricted. The lake remained serene beyond the windows, but the meaning of the view had changed. For Queen Marie, Berg had symbolized freedom. For Ludwig, it would mark the beginning of confinement. And as the trees stood watch along Lake Starnberg, the forgotten queen's mansion entered the final chapter of its royal story. When King Ludwig II arrived at Berg Palace in June 1886, he was no longer the visionary monarch commissioning castles in alpine valleys. He was a deposed king under supervision, escorted to a residence that had once been his childhood refuge. The transition was swift and calculated. Bavarian ministers, concerned about mounting debts and Ludwig's detachment from governance, assembled a panel of psychiatrists led by Dr. Bernhard von Gudden. Their report diagnosed mental instability based on testimonies rather than direct evaluation. Without personal examination, Ludwig was declared incapable of ruling. On June 12th, he was transported to Berg under guard. The palace, though modest compared to his other residences, now functioned as a place of containment. Windows overlooked Lake Starnberg. Forest paths wound through familiar terrain, yet the atmosphere had changed. Guards were stationed discreetly. Conversations were monitored. Witnesses described Ludwig as calm upon arrival. He maintained composure, even expressing confidence that public support might restore him. Indeed, protests in Munich suggested that many Bavarians still admired him. Inside Berg, daily routine continued in subdued form. Meals were served. Walks were permitted under supervision. Dr. von Gudden, respected in psychiatric circles, was tasked with overseeing Ludwig's care. On June 13, 1886, the final evening unfolded without outward disturbance. After dinner, Ludwig requested a walk along the lakeshore with Dr. von Gudden. Despite prior instructions that he should never be left alone, the two men departed unaccompanied around 6:30 p.m. Storm clouds gathered above the lake. The air was heavy. When they failed to return by 8 p.m., concern grew. Search parties combed the shoreline and wooded paths. Around 10:30 p.m., both bodies were discovered in shallow water near the shore. The official conclusion listed drowning, yet the details immediately generated doubt. Dr. von Gudden's body bore signs of struggle. Ludwig was known to be a capable swimmer. Reports suggested limited water in his lungs. The lake's depth at the location was minimal. Speculation emerged within hours. Some believed Ludwig attempted escape, possibly planning to reach loyal supporters across the lake. Others theorized confrontation, suggesting that a struggle led to both men entering the water. A minority proposed that political motives extended further than official accounts admitted. No modern forensic investigation occurred. The monarchy, already destabilized, moved quickly to restore order. Prince Regent Luitpold assumed leadership. Berg Palace returned to stillness almost immediately. The guards departed. The corridors quieted. But its identity had transformed permanently. It was no longer simply a royal retreat. It was the location of a king's unresolved death. News spread rapidly across Bavaria. Public mourning was profound. Ludwig, once criticized by ministers, became a figure of romantic tragedy. His architectural legacy would later define his reputation. Yet Berg remained the place where his life ended, not among towering spires, but along a quiet shoreline. The forest that had once sheltered privacy now guarded uncertainty. And the waters of Lake Starnberg, reflecting moonlight that night, kept their silence. After the death of Ludwig II, Berg Palace entered a new and subdued existence. Its walls still faced Lake Starnberg, but the atmosphere had shifted from private refuge to historical landmark. Prince Regent Luitpold initiated modifications to the palace in the years that followed. Architectural additions, including towers and updated interiors, softened some associations with confinement. Yet, the shoreline itself could not be altered. In 1896, a memorial chapel was constructed near the site where Ludwig's body was found. A wooden cross was placed in the shallow waters of the lake, marking the approximate location. Pilgrims and admirers began visiting the site, transforming a quiet stretch of shoreline into a place of reflection. Queen Marie had died in 1889, only 3 years after her son. With her passing, the generation that had defined Berg's early character was gone. The estate remained in the possession of the Wittelsbach family, but it no longer functioned as a centre of active monarchy. The 20th century brought further change. Following Germany's defeat in World War I, Bavaria's monarchy dissolved. The palace transitioned fully into private family ownership. During World War II, portions of the structure were damaged by bombing. Subsequent reconstruction simplified elements of its earlier design. Unlike Neuschwanstein, which evolved into one of Europe's most visited landmarks, Berg retained its seclusion. The estate remains largely inaccessible to the public. From passing boats, only glimpses of its pale facade are visible through dense trees. Historians continue to debate the final hours of Ludwig II. Suicide remains the official conclusion, yet questions persist regarding physical evidence and political context. The absence of definitive forensic analysis leaves space for uncertainty. Berg Palace stands at the center of that uncertainty. It was never the grandest palace of the Bavarian monarchy. It did not rise dramatically from cliffs or replicate Versailles in scale. Instead, it offered something quieter: withdrawal, privacy, separation from ceremony. For Queen Marie, it represented independence from rigid court life. For Ludwig, it began as sanctuary and ended as confinement. Today, the forest still surrounds the estate. The lake still mirrors the sky. The memorial cross remains in the water, unmoved by passing seasons. The mansion does not advertise its past. It does not compete for attention. It remains partially hidden, as it always was. Yet within its history lies a subtle intersection of personal refuge and political collapse. A queen seeking freedom, a king seeking escape, a dynasty confronting modern reality, and a lakeside palace that continues to stand quietly at the edge of the forest, holding its unanswered questions beneath calm water.